I remember the day we met like it was yesterday. I had just moved to town, lonely and looking for a fresh start, and he was the first person to make me feel seen. It was a rainy afternoon at the corner cafe, the kind with foggy windows and the smell of burnt espresso. He offered to share his table when there were no seats left. Our conversation started awkwardly, but soon we were laughing over stories of childhood mischief and dreams we hadn't dared to chase. His eyes sparkled with kindness I hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. We spent hours there long after our cups were empty, until the barista kicked us out at closing. He walked me to my car, umbrella shielding us both from the downpour, and when we reached my door, he hesitated before asking if he could call me sometime. I remember the flutter in my chest as I scribbled my number on a napkin. I drove home smiling like an idiot, playing our conversation over and over in my head. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere, like someone might actually care if I was around. I didn't know then what the years ahead would hold, but I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something that could heal the parts of me I thought were broken forever. After that rainy night, we were inseparable. It felt like we were building our own little world, brick by brick. He moved into my tiny apartment after only a few months, and we stayed up late painting the walls, dreaming about our future. We talked about kids, travel, and all the things we'd do once we had enough saved. Money was always tight, but we learned to make the best of it. Dollar store date nights, home-cooked meals on a blanket in the living room, and handwritten notes tucked into each other's pockets. Our love felt like it could carry us through anything. When we found out I was pregnant, we were terrified, but overjoyed. We decorated the nursery with secondhand furniture and bright yellow curtains, wanting our baby to feel surrounded by warmth even when we had nothing else to give. He worked long hours, and I picked up odd jobs where I could, both of us exhausted but happy to come home to each other every night. We celebrated every milestone, no matter how small. Our first anniversary, the baby's first steps, the first Christmas we spent as a family. Even when bills piled up or cars broke down, we held on to each other like we were each other's lifeline. Back then, I really believed that love alone could be enough to weather any storm. I wanted so badly for the fairy tale to come true, and for a while, it really felt like it had. We had just welcomed our second child when his mother fell ill. The doctor said she couldn't live alone anymore, and there was no way we could afford in-home care or a nursing facility. So we made the decision together. We packed up our things, sold most of what we owned, and moved into his childhood home to take care of her. It was supposed to be temporary, just until she got better, or we found another option. I tried to look at it as a new adventure, a chance for the kids to know their grandmother, for us to save some money, for our family to grow even closer. But the first night there, I felt a knot in my stomach I couldn't ignore. The house was cold and cluttered with decades of old memories that weren't mine. His mother watched me with wary eyes, already suspicious of the girl who had taken her son away. I spent my days chasing toddlers through narrow hallways and trying to keep the peace between them. He reassured me we were doing the right thing, but I could already sense the walls closing in. It felt like we were guests in someone else's life, not building our own anymore. I missed our tiny apartment, our late-night dance parties in the kitchen, and the feeling of being partners facing the world together. Still, I told myself this was what love meant: sacrifice, patience, and holding on, even when it felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. It didn't take long before temporary turned permanent. One morning, his mother fell in the bathroom and broke her hip. The surgery left her wheelchair-bound, and the doctors said she'd never walk on her own again. I remember sitting in the hospital room, staring at the linoleum floor as the reality sank in. There would be no going back to our old life. I became her primary caregiver almost overnight. Cooking, bathing, cleaning, changing her dressings. My days blurred into a haze of medicine schedules and endless laundry. She hated needing help, and I can't blame her, but her bitterness turned to resentment, and it spilled over onto me. No matter how hard I tried, I was always doing something wrong. The soup was too cold, the pillows weren't fluffed right, the children were too loud. I told myself she was in pain and scared, but the constant criticism chipped away at me. He worked longer hours to pay the mounting bills, and when he was home, he was exhausted or comforting his mother. We stopped talking like we used to, stopped laughing. Our bedroom became a place for sleep, not love. Every day, I felt myself fading, my hopes, my energy, my sense of who I was. But I kept going because I thought that's what good wives and daughters-in-law did. I told myself that once the kids were older or things settled down, we'd find our way back to each other. I clung to that hope like it was the only thing keeping me afloat. Every morning started the same way. Before the sun came up, I'd get up to help her out of bed, clean her, and get her dressed. I'd feed the kids, get them ready for school, and spend the rest of the day tending to her every need. By the time the kids came home, I'd be so tired I could barely keep my eyes open, but there were still homework assignments, dinners to cook, and baths to give. I felt like I was on a hamster wheel that never stopped spinning. She needed help with everything, using the bathroom, eating, even turning over in bed at night. And no matter what I did, it was never enough. If I left the room for too long, she'd call for me in a sharp, accusing voice that sent my heart racing with guilt. If I tried to take a break, the kids would start fighting, or the house would erupt in chaos. I started having panic attacks, small moments where the walls seemed to close in, and I couldn't catch my breath. But I couldn't let anyone see how much I was struggling. I told myself I was strong enough, that I had to be, because no one else was going to pick up the slack. I smiled for the kids and acted like everything was fine. But at night, after everyone was asleep, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could keep this up before I broke completely. I lost count of how many times I tried to win her over. I cooked her favorite meals, cleaned every corner of the house until my hands were raw, and made sure the kids were polite and quiet whenever she was resting. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. She'd sigh dramatically when I entered the room, make snide comments about how things were better before I came along, or complain to him that I was lazy or incompetent. The worst part was that he never stood up for me. If I tried to talk to him about how her words hurt, he'd tell me she didn't mean it, that she was old and in pain, and I should just let it go. I started to believe him, that maybe I really was the problem, that if I just tried harder or complained less, she'd finally see me as part of the family. But the more I gave, the more invisible I felt. Even the kids noticed. They'd ask why Grandma was so mean to Mommy, and I'd hush them, telling them she was just having a bad day. But inside, the rejection burned like acid. I started to resent both of them, her for her cruelty, and him for his silence. I missed who we used to be, missed feeling like we were partners. But in that house, with every passing day, it felt like I was just the hired help. I kept telling myself things would get better, but deep down, I knew the woman he married was disappearing, and I wasn't sure she'd ever come back. Time passed in a blur of doctor visits, school events, and nights spent on the couch because the bed was too crowded with his mother's medical equipment. The kids grew up faster than I ever expected. One day they were toddlers clinging to my legs. The next, they were teenagers with their own friends, their own dreams, and a fierce need for independence. I was proud of them. They were kind, smart, and stronger than I ever could have hoped. But as they needed me less, the emptiness I'd tried so hard to ignore became impossible to hide. There were no more diaper changes or school pickups to distract me, no more little voices asking for bedtime stories. I started realizing that once the kids were gone, there would be nothing left for me in that house but caregiving and criticism. The thought terrified me. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Tired eyes, hunched shoulders, and a hollow ache where my joy used to be. The kids began to notice too. My oldest asked me if I was happy, and I didn't know how to answer. I think that's when I finally admitted the truth to myself. I couldn't keep living like this. I had given everything I had to everyone else, and there was nothing left for me. As they started planning for college and life beyond our crowded home, I quietly began to plan too. Not just an escape, but a chance to finally find myself again. The day I left, the house was quiet, except for the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I'd spent weeks secretly packing my things a little at a time so no one would notice. I waited until the kids were both off to school and he was at work. I stood in the doorway of each room, memories flooding me. The spot on the kitchen floor where our youngest took her first steps. The worn armchair where I'd rocked them to sleep. The corner of the yard where we'd tried to plant a garden that never grew. It hurt to walk away, but staying felt like drowning. I left a note on the kitchen table, explaining that I loved them but couldn't keep losing myself for someone who'd never see me as enough. I wrote that I needed time to remember who I was, beyond being a wife, a mother, a caretaker. I drove away with a duffel bag of clothes, a box of keepsakes, and tears streaming down my face. I found a small apartment in a neighboring town. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. The first night alone, I sat on the floor eating cereal straight from the box and felt a strange mix of terror and relief. For the first time in years, I could hear my own thoughts. I missed the kids terribly, but I knew I couldn't keep teaching them that love meant sacrificing yourself until there was nothing left. I promised myself I'd find a way to be present for them without disappearing again. It didn't take long before he called. The first time, I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear his voice, afraid it would pull me right back into the life I'd worked up the courage to leave. But the messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. He missed me, the kids missed me, his mother needed me. He said things could be different, that we could make it work. He begged me to come home. For a moment, I almost believed him. I closed my eyes and pictured our old dreams, the nights we spent wrapped up in each other, the life we swore we'd build. I wanted so badly to believe that love could fix everything. But then I remembered the sleepless nights, the constant criticism, the loneliness of lying next to someone who couldn't see how much I was hurting. I remembered how small I'd become in that house. When he called again late one night, I answered. He sounded so tired, so sad. He asked if I'd come back, if we could start over. My heart ached hearing his voice, but I knew what I had to do. I told him I loved him, that I always would, but I couldn't lose myself again. I said I'd be there for the kids, but I was done living a life that made me feel invisible. It was the hardest thing I've ever said, but when I hung up, I felt like I could finally breathe. In the months since I left, I've learned how to sit with the silence without feeling like it might swallow me whole. At first, I didn't know what to do with the empty hours. I kept waiting for someone to call my name, to need something, to remind me I existed for them. But slowly, I began to remember what it felt like to exist for myself. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since before the kids were born. I found a part-time job at a bookstore, where I spent afternoons surrounded by stories and quiet conversations that made me feel alive. I met friends who saw me as more than a caretaker or a wife. I laughed, really laughed, in a way I hadn't for years. The kids visit on weekends, and our time together is sweeter now, free from the tension that once hung over everything. We cook simple meals, play board games, and talk late into the night. They tell me they're proud of me, and I can see in their eyes that they mean it. I've learned that loving myself doesn't mean I love them any less. When he calls, I answer, but the conversations are different now. Kind but firm, compassionate but clear. I tell him I hope he finds peace, but I won't come back. For the first time in as long as I can remember, I wake up each day grateful, not for surviving, but for living. And I finally know that I am enough, all on my own.